Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith with everyday life. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Down to Earth Ministry, a ministry of stewardship, a mission of faith, and by the generous support of our patrons. For more information, please visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. Let's get to it. Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith to everyday life. I'm so glad that you've decided to join us here today for what I can tell is going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk about something that we don't hear a lot about when it comes to like Catholic YouTubers and stuff. I don't think that I've ever seen a podcast or heard a podcast or seen a video that talks about this issue. I'm not saying it's not out there. I'm just saying that, like, you know, when you are looking for stuff to listen to, this isn't one that I typically find, but it's one I think that's very important. Today, we're going to be talking about money. What does it look like for a Catholic to be faithful with their money? What are we supposed to do with it? You know, a lot of Protestants talk a lot about money, but it doesn't seem like too many Catholics talk about this. So we're going to be dealing with this because I got a question sent to me from Jacob. And Jacob writes this. He says, first and foremost, thank you for the podcast. I really like the practicality and directness of it. It helps a lot. Hey, thanks a lot, Jacob. That's what I'm trying to do here. Secondly, could you please talk about money? For example, how to save. Should we tithe? Should we give money to the homeless? Should we invest? How to modestly spend money on the things we like, etc. God bless, Jacob. And I tell you what, this is a great idea. And I know it's something that some people might think, aha, here we go, talking about money, you know, Keith's after your money. I'm not after anybody's money, trust me. Okay, but here's the thing. Talking about money is something that we have to do as Christians. Because if we look at what Jesus talked about, he talked a lot about money. And why did he do that? Because he understands something that a lot of us also understand, even though we don't want to admit, that money is a huge deal for many of us. And I know a lot of people use this as a reason to like not go to church or not think about God or any of those things. I mean, you hear people say stuff like, oh, I don't ever want to go to church again because that pastor or that priest talks so much about money. It really turned me off. I used to get that all the time. People would be offended if you talk about money. It's amazing to me how something like money can be the thing that people just instantly get super defensive about. And they're just like, don't go there. Don't talk about that, which always to me makes me feel like I want to do it even more. Because when someone's so protective over a certain area of their life, it typically means it's intimately connected to their heart. And whatever's connected to our heart, that's what Jesus is after. So why should we be afraid to talk about that? Why should we be afraid to examine that? We shouldn't be. So that's exactly what we're going to do here today. Now, a lot of you know that I used to be a pastor in a Protestant church, and now I'm a Catholic. And I've, of course, discovered a lot of different things as far as how things are lived out in the Catholic Church versus the Protestant church. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was there's a difference in the way Catholic churches, I'm talking like local parishes, that I was seeing, like, dealt with their money. And I guess this first became apparent to me when, as a new convert and walking through that process, I was looking at our particular parish and wondering why it was so different than the church I used to work at and came from. And here's what I mean by that. And I remember having this conversation with our priest at the time. I said to him, I'm like, you know, this Catholic parish, compared to where I've come from, is pretty big. I mean, there were probably, I'd say, I think between 2,000 or 3,000 people on a weekend would visit this church for one of the masses or whatever. And, you know, to me, that was pretty big, right? The church that I came from had about 700 people per week attend our services, and, you know, would consider like maybe 2,200 people as members of the church. And here's where I'm getting at. The church that I came from, where I worked full-time in ministry for 6 years, we had like 13 people on staff. We had a full-time senior pastor, I was full-time on the pastoral staff. We had a full-time administrator. We had a full-time care pastor. We had a full-time discipleship, assimilation type person. We had a part-time small group discipleship coordinator. We had a full-time music guy. We had 2 full-time custodians, or a full-time and a part-time, or something like that. I mean, we had children's people. We had this big staff. We had a choir director. We had a handbell choir director. And all these people were getting paid, and were dedicated to the church, and it was their staff. Whereas this Catholic church that I was joining had the priest, a couple of office people, and I think some part-time program people. There was like a woman who was like a discipleship or faith formation coordinator, but I think she was like super part-time, and maybe a couple other people, but no youth pastor, no music pastor. I mean, everybody that was doing those things was either super part-time or a volunteer, or our priest just did this. And I remember saying to our priest, I'm like, what's the deal? Why don't Catholic churches have more programmatic full-time staff? Now, here's what I know. There are churches that do. I get it. But just like in my own local area, it seems like there's a lot more Catholic churches that are lean on their staff. And, I would ask, well, why is that? And basically the answer what he gave to me was, we just don't have the money. We don't have the money for those things. And I remember thinking, how? How can we not? When there's all these people that come to church. And he said, well, the level of giving in most Catholic churches isn't probably, Keith, what you're used to in most Protestant churches. And, and I asked him, well, why not? What is the Catholic position on things like tithing, which we'll talk about in a minute? And he basically shared with me a couple things. He said, first of all, practically speaking, our churches have to give a lot of money to the Catholic school system in our city, the Catholic education system. Whether you agree with that or not, that's where a lot of the money that gets put into parishes goes. And then secondly, they have to give to the diocese and different other things. But the bigger issue that I was more worried about was, well, why don't people give more? And the answer he gave me was kind of interesting. He said, well, the Catholic Church has also historically been known to be, the church of the poor. And there's a lot of poor people that come into the church. And so, we consequently, we don't want to hamper people with all of this, hey, you better give this, you better do that, you better give this percentage of your income, because for me, where I came from as a Protestant, the concept of the tithe was kind of a big deal. Now, a lot of you understand what tithing is, but let me just share with you for those that don't. Tithing is basically this idea that you give 10%. So a tithe is 10%, and that comes from the Old Testament where Moses talked about bring 10%, bring a tithe of your first fruits to the Lord. And there's a lot of scripture in the Old Testament that talks about tithing. One of the most famous ones is found in Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10. And this one gets quoted all the time, especially during pledge drives, right? Here's what Malachi says. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Now, I remember hearing that going, okay, that's like God throwing down the gauntlet saying, look, this is one of probably the only place that I find where God says, test me in this. And see, if you do this, if you bring in the whole tithe, the 10% into the storehouse of God, then just watch what will happen. I'll bless you more than you can possibly imagine. And that gets thrown around a lot in churches that want to talk about tithing because, it's a big deal. And let me be upfront about this. I believe that. I believe that the tithe, even though, and I'll say this, is not specifically mandated in the New Testament, okay, or by the Catholic Church, by the way. Let me just cut to the chase. I think that it's a good place to start. I think that there's scriptural, evidence for why this is a good idea, but I don't think that it's the be-all, end-all, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But ultimately, when we begin to look at our own lives and look at what we believe about God and our money, if we're not willing to return a portion of that to the Lord, then we have to ask ourselves why. Now, I found this article and it's called "Do Most Christians Tithe?" And I think this is kind of interesting. And it talks about in the ancient covenant that the tithe was really just the beginning for the Israelites. It wasn't like they didn't stop. And it says, according to this article, that Israelites actually gave around 23% of their income when you factor in all the things they were required to give. Now, here's the thing. On average, according to this article, Christians, and this is Protestant, Catholic, everybody, give around 2.5% of their income to churches. So in that sense, most Christians do not tithe. Now, I don't think this article is saying, yay, Christians. I think what it's saying is, look, this isn't something that, even though we want to talk about it sometimes, even like especially in the Protestant world, this isn't something that most people do. Most people aren't there. 2.5% of their income. So I tell you what, as Catholics, we have to recognize that, this is something that we need to be thinking of because, first of all, even though we're not required to give a tithe, we are required to give. We are required to give. And I think that's important. Jesus talks a lot about this idea, but he doesn't say you as a Christian in the New Testament or in the church have to give a tithe, because for Jesus, so much of what he talked about wasn't about like, all right, here's the formula, here's the, percentage, and here's the amount. What Jesus talks about more than anything is the heart. And there's a really great place to see this where in Mark 12, starting in verse 41 or 41, there's this interesting thing that happens, and I'll read it to you. Then he sat down opposite the offering box and watched the crowd putting their coins into it. Many rich people were throwing in large amounts, and a poor widow came in and put 2 small copper coins worth less than a penny. He called his disciples and said to them, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the offering box than all the others. For they all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in what she had to live on, everything she had. You see, this is the core, friends. It's not about the percentage or a certain amount. And I think this is why the Catholic Church doesn't nail this down. Because what the Catholic Church wants us to understand more is what it means to love God more than your money. And that can't be quantified. It can't be put into a formula, and it can't be put into an equation. For example, let's look at what the Catechism talks about. Okay? In paragraph 2544, we see this. Jesus enjoins his disciples to prefer him to everything and everyone, and bids them renounce all that they have for his sake and that of the gospel. Shortly before his passion, he gave them the example of the poor widow of Jerusalem, who out of her poverty gave all that she had to live on. Okay? The precept of the detachment from riches is obligatory for entrance into the kingdom of heaven. So what we just looked at there. All Christ's faithful are to direct their affections rightly, lest they be hindered in their pursuit of perfect charity by the use of worldly things and by an adherence to riches which is contrary to the spirit of evangelical poverty. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The Beatitudes reveal an order of happiness and grace, of beauty and peace. Jesus celebrates the joy of the poor, to whom the kingdom already belongs. The Lord grieves over the rich, because they find their consolation in the abundance of goods. Let the proud seek and love earthly kingdoms, but blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Abandonment to the providence of the Father in heaven frees us from anxiety about tomorrow. Trust in God is a preparation for the blessedness of the poor. They shall see God. Okay, so you see what the Catechism is telling us here, and it's showing us this text from Mark as a good example. It's saying that, it's not just enough to like keep track of a financial plan and live according to it, okay? What it's saying is that our hearts can't belong to our money. That we have to entrust God with everything. So what I think I'd like to do here as we move through connecting these eternal truths about money to our everyday life is I want to bring some truths to you here and connect them with some scripture. And here's, according to what we're seeing here, here's the first truth, that if you want to live out your Catholic faith to the fullest with regard to your money, Jacob, here's what you have to recognize first, okay? Number one, you have to love God more than money. Now, that might seem obvious, but let's face it, a lot of us fail at this. It's been said that if you show someone your checkbook and your calendar, then everything they need to know about your spirituality and who you love the most when it comes to your faith will be revealed. Because what we do with our money and what we do with our time shows where our top priorities are. What's the reason why people can't do the things that they want to do, right? It's because they don't have enough money or they don't have enough time. Well, why is that? Because they're spending their money and their time on the things that really truly matter to them or are their highest priority. So if you love God more than you love your money, that should be reflected in your giving. Okay, but how do we get there? How do we understand that this is really more about what's going on in your heart than anything else? Well, I think this is super important because, of course, Jesus talks about what the greatest commandment is, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So it's not so much about like, well, hey, do you practice tithing or do you do this or do you do that? You know, if you love God more than your money, then you're not going to have to sit around and go, well, hey, wait a minute. Am I giving enough? Okay? You won't have to do that because the love that God has for you and the love that you have for God will make that not be an issue. Okay? Now we'll talk about some of the practicalities here in a minute. But remember, this is about ultimately love. Because let's face it, a lot of people love their money. A lot of people love their stuff. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10 says this, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. Now, how many of you know this, right? How many of you have learned this lesson in your life? And this isn't just about a lesson for the rich. This is about a lesson for everybody because this is not about the amount. This is about what's going on in your heart. And if you love money, then friends, whether you have a little or a lot, you're going to be in serious trouble. Whether you have a little or a lot, you're not going to be happy. Too many people who don't have a lot of money think that if they do have a lot of money, then they'll be happy. Then everything's going to work out in life. Then everything's going to be great. Yes, it's true. Money can solve some problems in life. It absolutely can. But guess what it can also do? It can also invite a lot of problems. Now, I have a few people that I know personally that I think I can safely say they're pretty wealthy, okay? They're pretty wealthy. And none of them are the happiest people that I've ever met in my life, okay? The people that I know that have a pretty good amount of wealth, they've got problems that I don't even have to even think about. They've got problems with everybody trying to find a way to scam them out of their money. They've got problems with every person who's got a great idea and says, hey, I've got this great idea. I just need your money to make it happen. And their family and friends coming to them with their hands out saying, hey, I need this from you. I need that from you. That's a problem that people without money don't typically have. But it's a big problem for those that do. As a matter of fact, one of my good friends I've noticed over the years has become more and more isolated from people that they didn't used to be. And I think it's because they're afraid that if they let people too close to them, there's going to be this constant pressure that they have to give them stuff, right? You see, having money doesn't mean all your problems are going to go away. No matter how much you have, there's always going to be a need for more. You see, if your heart belongs to your money. Now, it's interesting that some of the happiest people that I've met are people that don't have a lot of money. It's true, and you've seen it. I used to spend a lot of time in Haiti and taking mission trips down there. And the people that we would work with in Haiti, they literally had, almost nothing. Some of them lived in shacks on a dirt, field, and they barely had anything. And some of these people, I was just amazed by their level of happiness because you know what they did have? They had faith. They had a love of God. And they would come to church, and church down there would last for 3 hours sometimes. And they would worship Jesus. They would love God. They would praise him. And they never were like, oh, I need money. It's going to make me happy. Now, could they have used money? Absolutely. What were we doing down there? We were there to help them. But we weren't there to make them happy. We were there to serve them. Because here's the thing. If money's required to make you happy, then, man, I tell you what, you're going to be in some serious trouble. You'll never be satisfied. You'll never be satisfied. Okay, another scripture, Matthew 6:24. Jesus says this, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, let me tell you what that's not saying. It's not saying that you can't love God and have money. It's saying that you can't serve both God and money. You can't have two masters. You can't live your life and your sole purpose of life is to acquire money and stuff and at the same time serve God. You got to love one and hate the other. You got to be so connected to God that even if you lost all your money, it wouldn't change you. And I know that that seems like a crazy thing to say, but it's true. This isn't about an amount, it's about your heart. Another scripture that I think is powerful, this is a good memory verse, is Hebrews 13:5. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. That's powerful. So how do we learn to do that, right? How do we learn? Well, the secret's right there. Be close to God. Remember that the closeness with God is more important than anything. Be content with this stuff in your life, but try not to let money become more important to you than Jesus. It's huge. And one of the most important passages from the New Testament comes from 1 Timothy chapter 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Wow. Think about that. I mean, we probably all have stories of people who we've seen their love of money has driven them away from God. It's a powerful thing. We got to be content with what we have. We have to remember, friends, that really all we truly need is food and clothing. And if you look at all the evils in our lives, if you look at all the things that have been scourges of society, at the root of it oftentimes is a love of money. People will do whatever they have to do to get money. People will isolate themselves from family and friends over money. People will sin willfully over money. People will hurt other people over money. It's terrible. Pierced themselves with many pangs. Okay? We don't want that. We don't want that. Now you might say, well, does that mean that all rich people are like big time sinners and that they should get rid of their money and renounce everything and whatever? No, listen to what he also goes on to say in verse 17. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty or to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So if you're rich, if you happen to be wealthy, that doesn't in and of itself mean that you're like a horrible person. But here's what the Bible says that we need to do with that. It needs that our attitude can't be like, well, we're better than other people because we have money. I mean, let's face it. Sometimes we can do that. We can judge other people by how much money they make. We can look at somebody and we can kind of gauge in our minds, well, how successful are they? How smart are they? Or how hardworking are they? Or whatever, based on how much money they have. And that's a sin. We can't judge somebody. We can't think that we're better than somebody else because they have less than we do. Because how would you feel if somebody who had more than you looked down on you? Being haughty is not consistent with godliness. It also says, don't set your hopes on the uncertainty of riches. Because we know from Christ's words, of course, that if that's where you put your faith is in your riches, where thief can break in and steal, where moth can eat, where it can be destroyed, you're going to have problems. Your faith can't be connected to your money. You can't let that be your certainty, okay? But remember, focus on God, who provides you with things to enjoy. It's okay to enjoy the fruit of your labor. It's okay to do that. But also, remember, do good works. Be rich in good works. It's interesting, like we talk about the whole tithing thing. I think this is important. What we see in Christ is not, well, the widow figured out the 10% and put that. No, it says that she gave all she had. Whereas the other people, they gave a vast amount more numerically, but less proportionally. You see, more important than the idea of a tithe is this. Do you give proportionately? Do you give in a sacrificial way? You see, if you make $10 million a year and you go, well, I'm going to give away $1 million a year out of a tithe. Yeah, you gave away $1 million. That's a lot of money. But you lived on $9 million, which is far more than you could ever possibly need. Whereas if a person that makes $30,000 a year gives away gives away a tithe of that, $3,000, that's a big sacrifice for that person. So it's not an equal sacrifice. You see, here's the thing. We have to remember that this is about our hearts. So if you're rich, hey, you got to be rich in good works. You got to be rich in generosity and being ready to share. Okay, so number two, the first one was this: love God more than your money. Number two, it's kind of like it: love others more than your money. Love others more than your money. Now that's where things get tough, isn't it? It's one thing to be like, all right, God, I love you. I fulfill my obligations to the Lord. But what does it look like then for you to also love other people more than you love your money? When you love other people more than you love your money, you can give generously to them, and you can take joy in watching them receive good things because of you. I love this from Proverbs. There's a lot of good stuff from Proverbs in this part. Proverbs 14:31 says, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. You see, if you can't separate these two things. You can't say, well, I love God with my money, but I don't love other people with my money, right? I'll give to God, but not to that other person. No, by giving to that other person, you honor God. By not giving to that other person, you dishonor God. It's that simple, friends. It's that simple. You got to be willing to do that. Okay, Proverbs 22 verse 9 says, the generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. I tell you what, that's a powerful thing, isn't it? When you recognize the joyful part of your life that can be so magnified by giving to others, I tell you, there's nothing you own that can bring you more joy than watching how your financial gift to another person can bring them happiness or bring them joy. Now, I know you say, wait a minute, didn't you say money doesn't cause happiness? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how when someone's struggling financially and you step up and help them, yeah, that makes them happy and it brings you joy. It's a powerful thing to do. And if you want to prove that you are ready to get serious about your faith and money, learn how to love other people more than you love your money. See, once you do that, then you can give freely. But the problem is, too many of us, we hold on to our money too tightly when it comes to other people, and we're very, stingy with it. But the scriptures tell us, no, we got to be generous. We got to be willing to do that. Okay, so now let's get a little practical. You say, okay, Keith, you talked about the whole tithe thing, and I know my Baptist friends, they're all about that, but us Catholics, we don't talk about it so much. So how are we supposed to figure out how much to give? I mean, yeah, we talked about sacrificial giving and all of this, but what does that look like practically? What are you supposed to do? Hey, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Number 3 is this. You need to make a decision about how much you're going to give, what your minimum giving is going to be, okay? Because I want to put us in a place where we are going to go beyond that in spontaneity, but I think we have to have a baseline of what we're going to start with. And why am I saying this? Well, 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7 says this: each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. This is powerful stuff. This, I think, is the best place to look to in the New Testament for the attitude of your heart. Because, again, remember, giving's about your heart. It's about love. And if you're giving to someone without love, without cheer, even to God, then you're wasting your time. Okay, God doesn't love a begrudging giver. So if when that offering plate's coming around or the baskets are being passed and you're grumbling into your mind, I don't want to do this, then, you know what? Just don't do it then. Because guess what? God doesn't need your money. What he needs is your heart. So when you look inside your heart, remember, you got to be cheerful about this. But you also have to make a decision. Did you notice there? It says each of you should give what you've decided to give. Not because some preacher or some, church told you. That's why the Catholic Church doesn't do that. It says, this is how much you need to give. But you have to decide in your heart what to give. Make that decision. Sit down with your spouse if you're married and come to a place, pray about it. Look at your income and decide. Make a prayerful decision on what you're going to do. Don't just tip God. Okay, there's 2 types of people who give. There are those who give intentionally, and there are those who tip God. Now, you know what I'm talking about, right? When you tip God, I mean, you're at church, you don't have an idea what you're going to give. The baskets are coming, you grab your wallet, you just kind of look in, and you grab something, you throw it in like a tip. Okay, you'd be surprised how many people approach their giving that way. And it's just well, whatever I have on me, if I got, $25, maybe I'll throw in a 5 or whatever it might be. I'm not throwing that 20 in, I'm just, whatever. See, that's one way to do it. I would advise against that. I think that you need to be a little more intentional about this. You need to sit down, you need to make a decision and say, this is what we are going to give, baseline bare minimum. And then that's how it is. And then once you've done that, right, be cheerful about it. Be excited about it. You know, and I think what you'll discover is these two things go hand in hand. When you get to do so out of your own decision and recognize that it's your choice, then you have the ability to do so cheerfully. But when you feel like you've been compulsed, when you feel like it's been a thing where you've been like, your arm's been like twisted and you feel guilty and you feel manipulated, nobody gives cheerfully that way. And I hate it when churches do that. Let's face it, they do. You know, the church I was in before, we had a building that we were raising money for like 10 years to build. It's a beautiful building. And it cost, I think, over $10 million ultimately to build this building. And the church had started fundraising for it well before I got there and is probably still working on paying that building off. My last Sunday there is when we put shovels in the ground and had a groundbreaking ceremony. It's kind of a weird day to be your last day. And, you know, I struggled with some of the things that happened there. And I can say this because I talked about this when I was still a pastor there. But, you know, we did what a lot of churches do when they want to raise a bunch of money. We went and we hired this expensive company to come in and help us raise the money. And, you know, one of the things that this company did was they employed what I consider, is my opinion, to be all of these like manipulative tactics to help people give more money. And there were two things that happened that really bothered me. I'll tell you the second one in a minute, but the first one was this. They looked at everybody's giving in the church, right? Because we kept track of what everybody was giving that we could, right? And they took that amount and they had this formula where they multiplied it by a certain number and came up with what they considered to be a, quote, hoped for amount. And I can't remember the exact way they figured it out. It was something like they took your yearly giving, they multiplied it times 5, and that was what they wanted you to give during this particular fundraising campaign, which lasted 3 years. So let's say you gave $10,000 a year to the church. They're going to say to you, well, we're hoping that you're going to give $50,000 on top of the $10,000 that you're going to give every year. We want 50 over a 3-year period. And the way they would show you that is they would send you this envelope and it had like, here's my pledge amount. And it would say this, here's your name. Here's the space for you to write your amount. And then underneath there's a number. And right next to that, it says hoped for amount. So they're telling you what they hope you give. And that number like really was offensive to a lot of people. And I remember having a lot of conversations with people. There were some people that left the church over that because they felt like they're like, what are you talking about? How can I possibly give? Because what ended up happening was this. It ended up strapping the biggest givers, people who were already stretching because they were giving faithfully and they were going even beyond what their tithe was or whatever. Now they're being told they got to give 5 times that in a 3-year period. And it was a struggle for a lot of people. I hated it. And I made no bones about it. I told everybody on that group, I said, look, I don't agree with this. I think it's wrong. You know what they said to me? Well, that's why you're not a professional fundraiser. I said, great. Okay, I'm a pastor. I was a pastor. It's not my job to worry about that. You know, I don't think that that's good, people. And if that happens in the Catholic Church, I'm against that too. I know it's not taught in the catechism, but if some local parish is telling you what you're supposed to give, friends, maybe I can't say that. I don't know. Forgive me if I'm sinning, but I don't appreciate that. I think that we should be allowed to decide for ourselves what to give, not under compulsion. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give a lot. I'm not saying that you shouldn't push yourself beyond what seems comfortable for you. I'm not saying that you're fine where you are. You're probably not. 2.5%, give 10%, give me a break, right? But your decision about how much you give needs to be your decision. But you got to make a decision. See, far too many people don't make that decision. They just leave it to chance, leave it to whatever they have in their wallet, and they don't think about it. Okay? If you want to be a cheerful giver, you'll make that decision, you'll honor it, and then you'll be able to do that. So, learn how to love giving. You got to learn how to love doing that. Now, here's a good way to learn how to love giving. Okay? And this again, here I'm gonna go back to this situation I was in, and I know that some Catholics are gonna hate this one too. Sometimes you just need to be able to give anonymously, okay? Because here's the thing, right? What does Jesus talk about in Matthew chapter 6, right? What does he talk about? He talks about what happens when you do your acts of righteousness for others to be seen, right? He talks about that, friends. He says, look, beware of practicing your piety before men in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give alms, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by men. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So what does that mean? Well, I don't think it means that, you can't ever write a check to the church that has your name on it or put a pledge in that says what you're going to give. I think churches need to know what's coming in. But if you give so that you can be noticed, that's a big problem. If you give so people can look at you and go, oh, wow, they're a fantastic giver, I think you have to do some heart work on that, okay? Now, one of the other things that this fundraising company was going to do that thankfully, our local church said, we're not doing that, is they wanted to put up a big plaque in the new building that, people could pay money to have their name put on there, and, like the silver, the platinum, the gold, the bronze, or whatever, and have their names listed on this plaque as a testimony to how much money they gave. Now, again, I've seen these in Catholic churches all over the place, okay? And, people want to whatever. I'm just telling you my personal opinion about it. I don't like those things, okay? I don't ever want my name to appear on something like that, okay? And it's not because I'm holier than thou, but because I don't believe that people should be able to walk in and go, oh, well, you know what? Because here's what can happen. Ooh, man, that guy, he's pretty cool. He's on that short list over there. Maybe I want to be on that. I want people to look at that list and go, wow, Keith Nestor is a very spiritual, loving, generous guy. I want people to see that. I'm going to give more. You know why the companies do that? Because it works. That's why they do it. They know that if they can guilt you into it or they can appeal to your pride. So the two things that are most contrary to life in the faith are being used against us are shame and pride, right? I mean, come on. We shouldn't be shamefully manipulated, and we shouldn't have our pride appealed to when it's time to give, friends. So how do you get around that? Simple. You give anonymously. Now, does that mean that it's never appropriate for you to give to somebody and they know it was you? Of course not. There are times when your gift and they know that it came from you is a huge blessing because it can invite relationship and it can invite inspiration. Okay, so don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you can't ever give to someone and they know that it was from you or whatever. What I am saying is that if you give to be noticed by other people, and if you make a big production out of your giving so that other people can look at you and go, wow, look at that guy, then guess what? Jesus says you get no reward for that. You get no reward for that. So give anonymously. Find ways that you can give and no one knows that it came from you. Okay? Maybe you go to a restaurant and you pick up somebody's bill anonymously and they have no idea that it came from you. Maybe you do something for somebody that is struggling and you find a way to bless them. I remember when Stella and I were young and we were struggling financially and we didn't know where we were going to pay for something that we needed to pay for. And I was making $22,000 a year as a youth pastor, and we had a baby and I was in college and we were we were okay, but we were struggling. And one day I opened up the mailbox, and inside the mailbox, there was $1,100 in there. It was pretty powerful. I have no idea who that came from. Another year, it was a brutally hot summer in Iowa, and our house didn't have central air. We had one mammoth air conditioner on the far end of our house, which wasn't very big, but it didn't reach our bedroom. And I think Stella was pregnant with kid number 2. And, our bedroom didn't have an air conditioner. And somebody bought us an air conditioner. They just dropped it off at our house. That's awesome stuff. And when we allow ourselves to be blessed by God by giving that way, there's some amazing things that can happen. So don't rob yourself of the joy of what it means to give anonymously, okay? That'll make you more cheerful. All right, I'll move on. I spent a lot of time on that one. Okay, But bottom line, make a decision. And then when you have opportunities to go above and beyond that thing, then do it. Number 4, okay? Number 4, try to increase every year. Now, do I have a Bible verse for this that says increase every year? I probably could find one, but I just don't do that. This is just practical opinion stuff. I don't want you to get like locked into this place where you've decided on your giving and then it never changes. Find ways to like increase. Just like you might look at your life and go, hey, how do I pray more? How do I fast more? How do I serve more? Also ask that question, friends. How do I give more? Find ways to do that. Now, there may be years that are leaner and more abundant. Do what you got to do. But if you can, try to find those ways to increase it. Because I've never heard anybody say, oh, man, I gave too much last year. Man, it was a real drag. I don't think we're going to have that experience when we get to heaven where Jesus is going to say, wow, man, you just gave too much that year. It was too much. I know this guy's not a Catholic, but I really appreciate his philosophy when it comes to his own personal giving. His name's Rick Warren. He wrote the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. He's from Saddleback Church in California. And when he wrote that book, The Purpose-Driven Life, I mean, he was a mega church pastor. I'm sure he was making plenty of money. But no one could have predicted the windfall of money that was going to come into this guy's life after writing one of the most popular books ever written besides the Bible, okay? Millions, and I've heard him talk about this in person, so I'm not just coming up with this out of my own thin air, but millions and millions and millions of dollars poured into him personally. And I heard him talk about this once at a pastor's conference, and it was powerful. And he was calling out these pastors in the room about their own personal attitude when it came to their giving. And what he was talking about was this. He said, look, I covenanted with God a couple things that were going to happen to me when all this money started coming in. First of all, I covenanted to give every dime I've ever been paid by my church back. So he started this church, and it was like 25 years later, he writes The Purpose-Driven Life. So what he does is he calculates how much money he's received in compensation over the entire course of his 25-year ministry there, okay? Probably a decent amount of money, and he just, boom, gave it all back, and he serves the church for free without a salary. Wow. I mean, that in and of itself is like above and beyond what probably most people would ever do, okay? So that's number one. But you think, okay, well, he's probably got bajillions of dollars. What does he care? This next one is the kicker. He made the decision that he was not going to change his lifestyle, okay? He wasn't going to change his lifestyle. He lives in the same house that he lived in before he wrote the book. He drives the same kind of car that he drove before he wrote the book. And I remember this was also cool. He held up his watch. He's like, I got a watch that is a Casio that is about a $40 watch from Walmart, Now, in the room, there are these dudes that have like a $700 watch, a new Mercedes, they live in big fancy houses. And of course, you can see how some of these, Protestant prosperity preacher guys, they get some money and it goes to their head. And now they're building mansions and they're doing all this stuff and they're driving these Bentleys. I watched a video one time of this. I'm not going to name his name. I've watched this video one time of this young Protestant preacher who had become very successful and built like a $5 million house, and people were freaking out, but he was like justifying it, and he was filming this video of him talking, and he had this like super cool watch on, and like he was like going out of his way to and the camera was like focusing in on the watch like it was like this cool. And I'm like, I think this dude is modeling this watch. And it was like almost to say like, hey, check me out. I'm a successful pastor. I wrote a book that sold millions of copies. I have a big church. I have an awesome watch. You want to be like me, right? Rick Warren was like, I ain't doing any of that. I'm not doing that. And I think, to me personally, that would be like the hardest thing to do, to have all this money come in and say, I'm not using it for things that, are going to change my lifestyle. Okay, the third thing that he said he was going to do was he was going to live on what's called a reverse tithe. He's going to tithe, give 90% of his money away, live on 10%. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Now, granted, his 10% is probably still more than most of us will ever see in a lifetime. But again, it's about the heart. But then lastly was this. He said, every single year since my wife and I have been married, okay, every single year since they've been married, we have always increased our level of giving every year. Whether we had good years, whether we had bad years, no matter what happened, we always found a way, even if it was just a little bit, to increase our giving. Okay, imagine what that looks like now for him. Okay, and here's what was cool. He looked at the rest of the room and he goes, would you guys be faithful enough with money if God brought it into your life to do that? I tell you what, guys, I don't know if I would be. I don't know if I could be like that. Okay, I'm just being honest. That'd be hard to do. But this idea of increasing every year, something to think about. Something to think about. Okay, and then number 5, and we're going to get into some practical stuff here, is this, okay? Number 5, be smart with your money, but recognize that your security is found in God. You know, Jacob was asking me questions about should we save, should we invest, should we do this, should we do that? We'll talk about that. Okay, here's the thing. Being smart with your money is important. Luke 12:15, Jesus says, then he said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Okay? You got to be on your guard against greed. You got to be wise. You got to remember that even though you have money and you can invest it and save it, which you should, that's not where your security comes from. That's not what defines you as a human being. Okay? So be smart with your money. Yes, don't be an idiot. Don't just blow it on stupid stuff. But remember that even if you're smart with your money, that doesn't mean that you're protected from, things going wrong in your life or that somehow your security is found there. I like what John Wesley said about money. I'm talking a lot about Protestants today. I like this quote from John Wesley. He says, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. That's from a sermon he wrote. I think the sermon was called On Money. Okay? I think that's pretty cool. Earn all you can, give all you can, save all you can, give all you can. See, it's important that there are people in the church that earn a lot of money. Right? Because how is the church going to function? How are priests going to be able to do their ministry? How are we going to be able to keep the lights on? How are we going to send missionaries? How are we going to print materials? How are we going to do the work of feeding the poor and taking care of people and doing all those things if there aren't people who learn how to earn money, save money, and give money? See, that's a part of what we need in the church is we need people who can do that. Right? But if people who just get their money are done with it, then what does that mean? So earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I think that's awesome. And then Proverbs 28:25. The greedy stir up conflict, but those who trust in the Lord will prosper. Okay? Don't be greedy. Don't always be thinking about how do I get more? How do I get more for myself? Think about how you can get more so you can give more. Think about how you can get more so you can empower the church to do more ministry. Think of how you can get more so you can fix some of those evils in the world that you can't tolerate. If you're looking at like, oh, I can't stand human trafficking, well, figure out how you can earn some money and fight against it. Oh, I can't handle kids that don't have food to eat at night. Well, then go earn some money, save some money, and make sure that they have food to eat. You see, that's what we need, friends. Trust in the Lord, and he's going to make you prosper. Okay, let's get super practical here. All right. How to save? Should we tithe? Should we give more money to the homeless? Should we invest some of these things that Jacob talked about here? Okay. So it all boils down to this. Decide first what you're going to give. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2, spend less than you earn. I know I might sound like Dave Ramsey here or something like that, but it's true. You should listen to him. Spend less than you earn. That's the bottom line. If you want to do okay with your money, then don't just go blow money you don't have and then try to figure out how to pay off your credit card or go into debt for stuff. Figure out, here's what I earn, here's what I spend. Create a budget, okay? That's important. Figure out where it's going to be intentional, right? Like understand what you're trying to do. And I would say this, and I think this is good advice, save at least 10%. I've always heard this. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Dave Ramsey. Give 10% at least, save 10% at least, and then live on 80% or a little bit less, depending on where those numbers actually fall in. Okay? That's a good rule of thumb. Now, you might not be able to get all the stuff that you want. Welcome to life. Guess what? Even if you blow all your money on stupid stuff, you still won't be able to get all you want anyway. So you might as well be not in debt and full of anxiety, okay? So live on what you don't save and don't give, but start with those 2 numbers, okay? Invest, absolutely. You should do that. That's smart to do. Not because you want to be rich, but because you want to be free. Think about that for a second. People that invest because they want to be rich, that's just a way to get greed, okay, to fulfill their greed. And that's no good. So if you're like, oh, yes, I have this awesome portfolio of investing and I have all this money and look at me and look at how great I am because I've invested all this. And it's like, oh, yeah, you can be so attached to that you forget, how much you should be loving God. But you invest so that you can be free. You invest so that you don't have anyone breathing down your neck going, hey, you owe me this, you owe me that. I mean, imagine what your life would be like for ministry if you didn't have to pay off your house or pay off your car. If you could pay all that stuff off by your investments and live off that residual income, and you didn't have to go to work at a job every day to earn more money, you could just be devoted to the Lord. How awesome would that be, right? That's why we invest. It isn't so we can go play golf and move to a trailer in New Mexico. Okay, it's so that we can. Although I really think that would be fun to go to New Mexico. I'm not a golf player, but we invest so that at some point in our lives we can be freed to do ministry. When Stella and I were working at this boys ranch, there was a couple who basically, when they got to like their retirement age, they sold everything they owned. They bought a truck and a camper, and they would travel around to different places of ministry, like our boys ranch, a church camp, or different places, ministry centers, and they would just spend their time working on projects and different things, and they just camp there, and they'd go from place to place and spend a month here and there. They were called like nomads. And I looked at that and I thought, that's pretty cool. I was talking to this guy one day. His name was Roger. I was talking to Roger one day down in the barn. We were working on some piece of machinery. Actually, he was working on it. I was just standing there distracting him because I didn't know how to work on machinery very well. And, we were talking about life and stuff, and he pointed up to his truck. And it wasn't like this fancy truck. It was kind of an older truck, and he had this trailer. It was modest. And he said, hey, Keith, here's the thing. Everything I own is right there. I don't have anything else tying me down. That's everything I own is right there. And I can pick up and take off and go do whatever the Lord's called me to do. And I was just like, that is awesome. Invest so you can get to that place. Now, you might be like, oh, well, I don't want to have a truck. I want to have a mansion on a hill. Whatever. Don't be burdened down by your possessions. Okay. Spend modestly. Yes. Be disciplined. Use cash. Don't just take your credit card out and just, plop it down every time you want something. How many people get in serious trouble with their credit cards? When it comes to like, Jacob's asking me, what about spending modestly on the things that we like or that we need? Here's what I would encourage you to do. Be intentional about what you're going to do. If you want something, even if it's expensive, save up the money for it. Make sure it's of good quality. Don't just buy garbage that you have to rebuy all the time. Save up for what's going to be good so that way you're good. You can cross that off your list and you're done. You can move on, right? Don't be like in this thing where it's like, oh, I got to have this, then I got to have that, and it's never enough. Let there be nothing in your life that you can't live without as far as possessions go. If there's anything that you own that if was taken from you, you'd be completely and utterly devastated and you couldn't function, hey, get rid of it right now because it owns your heart too much, okay? If there's anything in your life that's like, that's my prized possession, and if it was gone, I don't know how I would function, then just get rid of it right now. Get it over with, right? Don't let your possessions become your identity. All right, he asked a question about this, and I know I'm kind of like jumping around here. Should you give to the homeless? Okay, of course you should, but do it wisely. All right, I remember when I was a kid, I was like 16 years old. I was working at the mall. I was driving home one day, and this was the first time I'd ever seen this. There was a guy, and this is, a long time ago, 30 years ago. Holy cow. There was a guy standing in the median with a sign. Now these guys are everywhere, but this guy was standing there, and he was just like, wife and family stuck here, need food, please help. And I saw this guy, and I was so moved. I went home, and I started, like, making food. And my dad was like, what are you doing? And I told him, I said, oh, there's this guy down by the mall, and he needs food, and, I want to help him. I felt like I was led to do that. So I made up, my dad says, all right, I'll go with you. And I'm like, okay. I think my dad he knew what was going on. So I made up, like, a bunch of sandwiches and, like, made this stuff, and I drove back down there, and I walked up to this guy. And I said to him, and yeah, I thought I was curing cancer. Right? I thought I was I'm like Jesus to this guy. I'm going to solve all his problems because his signs that I need food. We'll work for food, something like that. And I walked up to him, and I said, here you go. I want to bless you with this. Jesus loves you. Because I didn't want to just give. I wanted to tell him it was from the Lord. Jesus loves you. And he looked at me and he looked at the stuff and he goes, hey, man, what I really need is like $50. Can you give me $50? And I'm like, what? I'm like, you said you needed money for your wife and your kids. Of course, they weren't there, And I asked him, I said, well, where's your family? He said, oh, some lady came up and she took them with her and they went somewhere. I'm like, so some random woman drove up that you don't know and just drove off with your wife and kids and you were cool with that as a dad? I don't think so. He's just like, hey, I just need $50, man. Can you give me $50? And I tell you what, guys, I was so deflated by that. I just threw the food down and walked away and got in the car. And, my dad and I drove home and I can't remember if we talked about it or what, but that just crushed me. And I would live to see that played out in my life, countless times as a pastor. People come in with their stories and with their lies and with their, and for a lot of people, it's just their career is making up lies and going to churches and taking money from religious people, trying to, whatever. I mean, so here's the thing. It's a struggle because we see these things, we want to help people. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. Although, you know what? I don't do that. I don't just give money to people sitting on the side of the road. I don't do it because believe me, I've seen enough of that to know that a lot of times that money isn't going for food. It's to buy drugs or whatever. But you know what? If that's what the Lord calls you to do, I'm not going to beat you up for it. But I think there are better ways to give to help people. And I think that part of our job as Christians and people who love the Lord is to find out those best ways to serve people and help people in their life the best way that you can. So because I think one of the things that's the reasons why those things are so helpful for people that are doing that with their signs is it's easy for a religious person out of guilt, whatever, just throw that guy $10 and then you can drive away and feel like you did your religious duty for the day. But really, what'd you do? You gave somebody some money out of your pocket, that you're not going to miss or whatever, and then you could convince yourself that you helped the poor. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I don't know. I'm just saying this. You got to be wise. You got to be wise because here's ultimately what I want you all to remember. All of the money that comes into your life belongs to God. We're just stewards of it. We're stewards of it. It's His money. It belongs to Him. And we have to ask ourselves, what's the best thing that we can do with that money? What do we do? Friends, ultimately it boils down to these things. I hope this has been helpful to you. And I know we're just kind of scratching the surface. I know we're kind of bouncing around. And I know this has been kind of a different podcast. If you think that you've heard this with, oh, Keith, I didn't want to talk about money. I want you to talk about Jesus. I want you to talk about theology. Hey, friends, get this. If you don't recognize how important the topic of money is to your relationship with Jesus and to your theology, you need to pick up your Bible and you need to look at how much Jesus addresses this issue, because what does He know, friends? He knows that wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So let's make sure our treasure is found in Jesus Christ, not in our possessions, not in our money, friends. May we be faithful stewards with what God has entrusted to us. May we be wise with it. May we be as wise as serpents, innocent as doves, and may we be faithful with what God's called us to have and do with our money. All right. God bless you guys. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Catholic Feedback. I'm so thankful that you took the time to tune in. If you have a question that you'd like me to tackle or an issue you want to discuss on Catholic Feedback, please email me at feedback@catholicfeedback.com and I'll add it to the mix. Thanks so much and have a great day. God bless. Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Stewardship, a mission of faith, and is also supported by our team at patreon.com/Keith Nestor. Please consider joining our support team. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information about Down to Earth or to bring me to your parish or event, visit down2earthministry.org. See you next time.